Good morning. Welcome to the second talk in this room on the last day. Then we start with Adrian Lin, listening to accents to improve your pronunciation. If you want to ask questions, again, the info is clear. Please go on slide.com. Oh, that's my secret, sorry. Yes. Go on slide.com, enter the hashtag back and ask your questions. You can start asking even now during the talk, and you can even vote on the questions so that just in the Q&A we can start with the questions. Now there's Adrian.
Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Alright. So it's nice to be here. This is actually my first time at the Polyglot Gathering, and I'm having a great time. I hope you're having a great time as well. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit first. My name is Adrian Lin, and I'm an accent coach and pronunciation trainer. So what that means is I help students, learners of English, improve their pronunciation and reduce their accent and sound more native in English. I have a background in linguistics. I have a degree in linguistics, and I have a multilingual family background. So I grew up in Hong Kong, but my dad is from the U.S. He grew up there, and he speaks Mandarin as well. My mom's from Hong Kong. She speaks Cantonese and English because she studied in the U.S. and lived in Canada. My grandparents speak Shanghainese, but they also spoke English. My grandmother was an English teacher, and I went to a British international school, so my teachers were British, and there were also some Australians and Canadians as well, so I was surrounded by lots of different accents, dialects, and languages, and so I was always very interested in the relationships between the sounds and how they change and how they're systematically different from each other. So, as you can see now, I'm doing what is my passion, and I imagine is a lot of your passions as well. And today, what I'm going to be talking about is listening to accents to improve your pronunciation. And what I mean by this is that you can listen to the accent of native speakers of your target language when they're speaking your native language, and you can listen to the patterns that the things that they say, how they say it, and from that deduce little things about your target language that can help you with your pronunciation and accent. So, what's going to happen is that I'm going to give you a few tips, and then I'm going to give you some examples, and I'm going to go through those examples with the tips that we just learned. So, to start off with tip number one. Tip number one is audialize accents. What I mean by audialize is it's kind of like visualize, but with audio. So, I actually learned this word just a week ago when I was looking for the right word. Because visualize obviously isn't the right word because it's not visual, it's audio. And when you do this, well, everyone kind of has an idea of what accents sound like. When I tell you, imagine the French accent, imagine the Spanish accent or Japanese accent. You have this idea. And it's because we recognize it. We subconsciously know what the accent sounds like and its features, the phonological system. So if I told you, imagine this sentence, whenever I hammer, I feel happy in a French accent. Some of you are probably imagining right now, it probably sounds a bit like this.
When the world is down, burger et puis la vie.
So, just as an aside, how I got that voice synthesizer was actually from, it's quite simple. I didn't know you could do this, but on Google Translate, if you go on Google Translate and you set it to French or whatever language, it's expecting French, but surprise, I put in English, and boom, you get this accent. And the reason for this is that it's using the phonological system of French to pronounce this English sentence. And that's essentially what an accent is. You're using the system of your native language or whatever language to pronounce the words and sentences of your target language, and it comes out like this because it's not doing it in the way that your target language should be pronounced. At least what native speakers pronounce it. Japanese, or in English, we get one mark means it with less GTPs. And if we have it in a Japanese accent, it will probably sound a bit like this.
One margarita pizza with less cheese, please.
Yes. So exactly, it sounds a bit like that. And yeah, this is a fun thing you do with Google Translate. I discovered this as well a week ago when I was trying to look for examples. It's hard to find examples and demonstrate the phonological things that you want to demonstrate. So this can be something to experiment with. The next tip is identify patterns. When you identify patterns, you are looking more deeply into the accent. You're not just imagining it. You're actually trying to look for when this sound changes to another sound, when this is pronounced this way, and when it's pronounced another way. And it's better than just imagining accents. Even though with imagined accent, you can kind of you can sort of prime yourself for the pronunciation of your target language. With this, you can actually deduce things like when it happens, when this process happens. So again, we have these examples, and if you listen, I want you to listen one more time, but listen for the consonants, for the sound, for the vowels, for the intonation, etc. See if you can notice any patterns.
When the vowel is down, burger est up.
So one thing you might notice is that there's no H sound. The H is the speaker. I'll call it the speaker because it's Google Translate. The speaker doesn't pronounce the H. She says I'm good and aquí. From this, you might deduce that French has no H sound because the speaker's not saying it. And you'd be right. French doesn't have an H sound. Of course, a lot of you have studied French in school. The teacher obviously told you the H is not pronounced. But some people actually just study it or like learn it by living in a place, with no formal education. And you might encounter some languages that don't really have textbooks. And if you hear the speaker speaking this way, you might be able to deduce this pattern. The H is silent. You might be just learning from Duolingo, for example. I don't think they actually have they'll tell you directly that there's no H sound. But another thing that's less obvious is that there's final syllable stress. The stress in French tends to be on the last syllable, on the last full syllable. And so that's why it's whenever, and you get words like déception. Like right now, because I haven't spoken French in a long time, but words are stressed at the end, montage. Other people other people who speak French don't know this. For the Japanese accent in English, let's listen to one more time. Focus on the intonation and the syllables.
One margarita pizza with less cheese, please.
So you might notice that for Japanese, in the syllable structure, there is a kind of constraint. You can't really say margarita. The speaker instead says margarita. And you can't say cheese, please. It becomes cheese, please. And the reason for this is that in Japanese, you just can't have a syllable that ends in a consonant, except for N. And it's not, even though here you might just notice it's for the R and Z sounds, it might prompt you to think, why is it R and Z? Maybe it's more. And you'll do some more research and then you find this pattern. Of course, I think Japanese is very well known for not being able to have syllables that end in consonants. That's why you get things like pocket consonants or pocket. You don't say pocket, it becomes pocket. But another thing that you might notice is the rise in pitch. Or maybe you might not notice this. But I noticed this even though a long time ago I learned Japanese for a year, but I never noticed it back then. But when I started teaching my Japanese students, I noticed they were saying things in English where the pitch is a bit off. It's very interesting. It's like they say things like margarita or second time instead of second time. We would say margarita, they say margarita. And you get words like konnichiwa, I believe, or ohayo. And so this kind of pitch is very, it's different. It's different than in English. And so this is something that you might identify as a pattern. Once you identify the patterns, you can more accurately, effectively predict how and when to do the right sound and improve pronunciation that way. And finally, the third tip is identify what confuses others. If you're consistently getting confused by when you're talking to people, native speakers or just even non-native speakers, maybe they can get confused when you say a particular sound, then you know maybe that's something you need to work on. You may in fact be mixing up contrasted phonemes. A lot of you probably do know what phonemes are, but for those of you who don't know, a phoneme is a sound in the language system that has meaning. So if you change one phoneme for another phoneme, you will change the meaning of the word. For example, in English, you said lead, but you meant red. That's a completely different word. However, in Japanese, if you said sayonara instead of sayonara, that doesn't mean a different word because L and R are not different phonemes. So they would still understand you meant to say goodbye. Whereas in English, lead and red, completely different words. A good example of this is in Russian, where you have soft and hard consonants. And so you get words like mat and mat. So when I first heard these, the teacher was like, kids, these are different sounds. Repeat after me, mat and mat. We were all like, no, that's the same sound. We couldn't hear it. We couldn't hear the difference between t and tip. And so, for example, these are not different phonemes in English. So if I said, oh, look at that doormat, and I said, look at that doormat, it's the same word, even though one has a t and one has a t sound. So it's not evenly contrasted in English, but it is in Russian. And why I have this image of a camel is because I was recently in Egypt and I joined a group, and the tour guide was talking about all these cool things about the beagle. And I was intrigued, but I didn't know what the beagle were, so I asked him, sorry, what are beagle? And he said, the beagle, the Egyptian beagle, the beagle who lived here. So at that point, I realized two things. I realized that he meant people, and then I realized that in Arabic, there's no P sound. It's not a phoneme. I don't speak Arabic, but I learned that it had no. I checked it out on Wikipedia because I always do that when I have a question about linguistics or something. I checked it out, but there is no P sound in Arabic. So he said people, which sounds like an English word, but isn't an English word. So I didn't think of people because it was a different phoneme. And so identify what confuses others because you may be mixing up contrasted phonemes. And so now I'm going to go through some examples and stories in my life, just general stories, and they're organized around common themes so that you can know where you should look, what sort of things you should pay attention to. So you can identify patterns and improve your accent now. So the first theme is consonants. Consonants are not pronounced identically everywhere. It may change slightly depending on the context, on the phonetic context. And I like consonants because they're easier to work with because you know where you get some physical feedback because you can feel your lips touching, you can feel your tongue touching particular parts of your mouth, and you get this physical feedback. Whereas with vowels, your tongue's kind of just like hanging there, and it's harder to calibrate. So here's an example from Spanish. This sentence, "Cómo te llamas? ¿Qué tal?" means "What's your name? What's up?" And in Spanish, it sounds, well, I just said it, but I'm going to play it from Google Translate as well.
¿Cómo te llamas? ¿Qué tal?
And in an English accent, it sounds like this.
¿Cómo te llamas? ¿Qué tal?
Right? It sounds, that's completely like, people will be like, oh, what a gringo accent. So, yeah, if you notice, the k and t sounds are not like k and t as it should be in Spanish. It's not como te llamas. English accent. It's like Portuguese. And the difference is aspiration. Some of you might know this term, but for those of you who don't know, aspiration is it's a puff of air that happens after certain consonants. And I'm not sure if this is a laser one, but you can see up there on the image. There's a little H on the spectrogram. This represents the sound. That H is that puff of air. And when we speak English, we say a puff of air. We don't say a puff of air. Because that would be the bottom, where you have the P immediately followed by the A, and that's ba, versus ha. So when English speakers speak Spanish, because in English, the first pasaka and sh sound of a word will always have aspiration. Words like como te llamas will be pronounced like como te llamas. So I tell my Spanish-speaking students, as well as a lot of my Latin language-speaking students, to pay attention to this. Pay attention to how English speakers speak their language and pronounce and mispronounce their words. And they're always like, oh my God, you're right. Oh my God, you're right. It does sound like that. And I teach them aspiration, and they know what to look for. And then they know how to practice it, and they know where to say, where to do the aspiration. Another example, something that I noticed, and I've never studied Portuguese, oh, I have studied Portuguese a little bit. I don't speak any of these languages, Portuguese or Italian, but when I was teaching my Portuguese and Italian speaking students, one thing that I noticed was something about the S sound. So let me play the English sentence here.
Sam Smith was slowly sneezing.
Pretty normal, the S is like an S. But when you listen to a Portuguese accent, it sounds like this.
Sam Smith was slowly sneezing.
So yeah, there's a little bit, I don't know why the Portuguese accent sounds a bit, the voice sounds a bit weird here. I think some of the languages in Google Translate aren't fully developed, but you get the idea, you hear the Z's there, right? Now, this is the Italian, it's similar.
Sam Smith was slowly sneezing.
So now you can hear that some of these are Z's, but not all of them. For example, Sam is still Sam. The speaker said Sam Smith was slowly sneezing, and the S's that became Z's are the last three, not the Sam, not the name Sam. So what is the pattern? The pattern, it turns out, after I listened to my students more and took down some notes on where they made mistakes and like analyzed what the phonetic context was, is that you actually get the S becoming a Z sound after certain consonants like M, like M, L, N, and R. These consonants tend to make the S sounds into Z sounds in these languages, and so that's why you get slogano, even though it's spelled with an S. That's why you get snello in Italian, even though it's spelled with an S. You don't say slogano or snello. I think in Italian, though, there's actually more than just that context. You get SB is also as the, and SD is also as the. I'm not completely sure because I don't speak Italian, but that is a pattern, and that's what I've noticed. And once I noticed this, I was able to create lessons for my Portuguese and Italian students to make them help them practice not doing this in English, because even though this is something that happens in Portuguese and Italian, we don't do that here in English. So, and that's also, I forgot to mention sabato. It's still an S because why? There's no N, L, and an R afterwards. And these, by the way, are called sonnet consonants. They are a type of consonant that share a physical property with each other, so it's not a random bunch of consonants. They have some physical features in common. But I won't go into that because that's a bit too complicated, but you will see patterns like this, and that's the importance of seeing patterns. Next, I want to talk a little bit about spelling. Sometimes spelling is helpful, even though as an English speaker, I know that English has some of the worst spelling systems. It has one of the worst spelling systems in the world. It's not been updated for a couple hundreds of years. So there's a lot of irregularities, but a lot of languages do have a spelling system that does show the sound. And some spelling systems even show the sound changes. So for example, when I was learning Croatian, I was talking to my Croatian friend, and I was using this word ubiti, and I wasn't pronouncing it right because she said, "Stop, Adrian, you're not saying it right. Why are you saying it like it's two sounds? It's not ubiti, it's ubiti. It's one sound, not two sounds." I had thought it was two sounds because it was L and J, but in fact, you can see up here in Javala, it's actually written together. There's no space between that. It's one letter. It's considered one letter, and that's because it's one sound. It's also quite obvious in this picture over here, Menyachiza, vertically. The N and J are horizontal, whereas the rest of the word is actually vertical, and that just indicates that it's actually one sound. It's a nya sound, not a nya sound, but nya. It's one sound, not two sounds. It's more obvious though in Cyrillic, if you could read it. The third symbol from the left is like an H-looking single circle, and that's the nya sound. It's one symbol there, so it's more obvious there, but you can still deduce it from here. And one thing that just happened is this. I was just outside 2 days ago, and I walked by this sign, Mechanica, and you can see that the C and H are actually written together, even though it's vertical, and that's because it's one sound. I actually haven't seen this in Poland before, even though I've lived here about a year, but it makes sense, it's one sound. So sometimes the sound system does help you. And speaking of Polish, there was one time I was speaking with my Polish friend, and I was trying to say time is money. So I said, I'll try to say it in Polish. Instead of, it's the first one, it's supposed to be ciasto pieniądze, but I said ciasto pieniądze. Which means cake, money. So, even though those sounds, ch and ch, are quite similar acoustically, they are different phonemes in Polish, and they can change the meaning. And so that's why my friend, when I said ciasto pieniądze, she paused for a second, and she was like, oh, okay. Time is money, not cake money. So I should have known that though, because it is spelled differently. CZ and CI. They're different sounds, even though they are quite similar to me. I'm getting better at this though. And then the third thing I want to talk about, the third and final example from the stories, is rhythm. Rhythm and vowels. These are a little more difficult to notice because you can't see rhythm in written text. It's not there. What I mean by rhythm is different languages have different rhythms. On the one hand, you got syllable time languages where it's like a beat, you know, you get like da 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 for syllable time languages where each syllable is roughly around the same amount of time. So languages like Italian or Spanish or Chinese and Japanese sort of, they're syllable time because each of the syllables is around the same amount of time. However, on the other hand, you got stress time languages where the stressed syllables are much longer than the unstressed syllables, which are shorter, and the beat is not regular. It's not da 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 da. It's more like da 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 da. And so you get English, for example. When we speak English, we have some syllables that are longer than others, and this is the way that we speak. This is not how we talk. When we talk English, it's not like that. That's not English. That's English in the syllable time rhythm, and it sounds kind of strange. You also have languages like Russian as well, where the stress level is a lot longer. So let's look at an example from Japanese. This sentence means, I am American. This is how it sounds like in Japanese.
私はアメリカ人です。
And then in English accent to Japanese, it sounds like this.
Watashi wa America jin desu.
So this, as I can tell that you all can recognize the English accent in Japanese, and the reason for this is one of the reasons for this is the rhythm. Watashi wa America jin desu rather than watashi wa America jin desu. And so you can tell that there is a sort of lengthening of vowels. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like there's double vowels. I tell my students, imagine, like listen to how English speakers speak. It's kind of like there are longer vowels where you'd expect just one vowel. It's not really a double vowel. The length of the vowel depends, even though the stressed syllables do have longer vowels. But I tell my students to listen for this accent and imagine this accent, and this is why it sounds that way. It's got the stressed rhythm, whereas Japanese is not a stressed language. And one example from here, from Poland, is this sentence, which means, "Hello, my name is Adrian. I'm from Hong Kong. I speak English, Polish, and Russian." I want you to listen to it. Polish is more syllable time than Russian. And it also has pure vowels, so the vowels don't change. What you see is what you get. It's got 6 vowels, a, e, o, blended, and they are pronounced, they're basically pronounced that basically everywhere in all contexts. Whereas in Russian, a lot of you have studied Russian, you know that vowels change their quality. They become other vowels when they're not stressed. And that's because Russian is a stressed language. So let's listen to the Polish sentence.
Dzień dobry, mam na imię Adrian, jestem z Hongkongu. Mówię po angielsku, po polsku I po rosyjsku.
So you can notice that it is fairly syllable time. Each syllable is roughly, it's closer to the same amount of time. Like, not all languages are either syllable time or stress time. They might be somewhere in the middle, right? So the Polish is more towards the syllable time side, in my experience. At least as compared to Russian. So let's listen to it in Russian accent in Polish.
Dzień dobry, mam na imię Adrian. Jestem z Hongkongu. Mówię po angielsku, po polsku I po rosyjsku.
So this is actually something I tell my Polish students to pay attention to, because Russian rhythm is actually more similar to English than it is than Polish is. So when I tell them to notice these things, they're more able to grasp the concept of rhythm and syllable length. And you can also notice that there is vowel change in the vowels. It's not Hong Kong like it was in Polish. It's Hong Kong. It's not Portuguese, it's like Teresin. And so that's why you get this sort of this Russian accent in Polish. It's It's not na imya, it's the imya, not now. So the vowels have changed. And so when I tell my Polish students this, they know what to pay attention to, and they're more able to actually produce the right pronunciation and accent. And so to end this presentation, I want to play this song. Some of you might notice it. I see some smiles in the audience. I'm just going to play it. I'm going to say, try to see if you understand anything. Know what language that was? It sounds a bit like English. I'm willing to bet a lot of you think it sounds like English. And it's not. It's gibberish. It's completely made up. It's not any language at all. It's a made-up language, but it's by this guy, Adriano Celentano, great name. But he's an Italian singer. He usually sings in Italian. But this time he wanted to create a song that sounded like English, but was not any language at all. So he created a bunch of gibberish and then applied the phonological systems of English, the accent of English, to the words, and now it sounds like English. I send this song to my friends a lot, and they're like, oh my god, I don't understand anything. Is that even English? It does sound like English, and that's because you can apply the phonological system processes, the accent to even these like this gibberish, and you get an English sounding song, and that's why you get these YouTube videos of like how Spanish sounds like to foreign speakers, to foreigners, how Italian sounds like to foreigners, how English sounds like to foreigners. I'm sure you've watched those videos online, and that's just because even though it's usually just gibberish there, they apply the accent, as it were, like the phonological systems and processes and the sounds to make it sound that way. So I guess if this guy can sound English, or sound like he's speaking English, American English, even when he's just speaking gibberish, by applying the accent features and pronunciation patterns to just a bunch of made-up words, then you can as well. Thank you very much. Okay, so just wanted to share another way to play around with pronunciations using an IPA reader from this website and select the speaker from another language. Oh, that's cool. I'll check that out. I'm gonna take a picture of this. Second language. What do you think of tonal languages like Chinese and Vietnamese, where different tones have mean different things? If the question means like how does it apply to accent and pronunciation, yeah, a lot of it can affect. So, for example, like I have a lot of Cantonese and Mandarin speakers, and often they say things like nationality. So they kind of apply different tones to different words, and it can sound unnatural. So they might say response, and even though the intonation of English might change depending on the type of sentence you're saying, they might always say like to at a particular pitch because they're applying a tone to it. And so it's quite difficult in my experience to work with that, but because tone, pitch, those things are quite subtle, you don't really get it written down. So it is quite difficult, and it is fairly noticeable in my experience. Alright. Do you think it's important to sound native? If so, why? No, I think it's more important to be just understanding. So I differentiate pronunciation and accent in that you can have good pronunciation but still have an accent. Good pronunciation means that you are saying all the phonemes understandably within the acceptable range. So for example, if you might have a particular phoneme. Remember, a phoneme is a sound that has meaning in the language, and that if you change it to another phoneme, you'll have changed the meaning of the word. But if the phoneme, for example, that native speakers usually, if there's a phoneme and native speakers usually pronounce it within this small range, that's the native range. But there's also like a bigger range like this, and that's the acceptable range, and people understand you. That's fine because you can say, for example, like I will talk, I talk English, and that sounds different from the sound. And you know that the speaker is trying to say talk, even though the speaker's not saying talk with aspiration. You know that the I'm talking means I'm talking, but it doesn't sound talking, right? If you say talking, that's a completely different phoneme, and now you're not understanding. So I think it's more important to have good pronunciation. But of course, a lot of people do want to have a better accent. Like I have a lot of teachers, English teachers that are not native English speakers, and they want to just sound better for their job. So next question. Why can some people switch between their native and proper accent when speaking a foreign language and others not? I think it's just practice, honestly. I think more exposure and practice will help you with that. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure that. How do you know when to stop improving your accent? I mean, when you're happy with it. You don't really need to improve your accent. I think it's not. You just need to improve your pronunciation, just so that you can be understood. That's the goal of language, to be understood and to understand and to be understood is the goal. But it's up to you. Some people really do want to pass as a native. Some people are Do you think it's more difficult to master another accent in a native language or an accent in a foreign language? I'm not sure. I think maybe an accent in a foreign language, because if you're starting off from the beginning, you won't have those bad habits. But to be honest, I'm not really sure. I'm not a dialect coach, so I don't teach people to, I don't teach native English speakers to sound, like Cockneys from London or multicultural London English or New York English. I just teach learners of English to improve to sound more native, like a general sort of English, like typically like western side of the U.S., but it can be other across the U.S. Let's see. Do you think it's possible to learn American accent when you already speak C1 English? Yeah, I think it is. I think it is because, accents are something that you should work on when you're like at the very, I guess below B, because you should be working on grammar. If you still think about grammar and you're still thinking about the words and how to say the stuff, then you should focus on that because you need to communicate first. Accent reduction, I think, is more complex. And when you're at C, you don't have to think about the grammar anymore. You don't think about the words, so you can focus on the processes and the environments, the phonetic environments. And yeah, so I think definitely you can improve it when you're at C1. That's actually probably the best level to improve that, because you don't have to think about all those other things. Do you think it's useful at the beginning when you start learning new language to focus on the alphabet and train to pronounce single letters only? You should learn the alphabet, but you shouldn't stop there, because different sounds change when they're put next to each other, and different letters might represent completely different sounds. Like the TH is not a T sound, it's not an H sound, it's a th sound, it's completely different. The Polish CZ is not Z together, it's sh, it's something else. But yeah, you should not just only focus on that. How do you teach someone to go from S to Z? For example, Spanish speakers saying easy, or Italian speakers saying smile. So the difference between S and Z is voicing, and that is when your vocal cords vibrate. And so I teach them, I usually look for something in their native language that has voicing, and get them to feel what voicing is. And what that is, for those of you who don't know, is that you can put your hand here, and then say ah, and you feel some sort of vibration, and that's voicing. Sounds that where your vocal cords vibrate are voice sounds, and then I just get them to feel when they say s, it doesn't vibrate, and then I get to try to use that feeling from another sound in their language, its voice, to make the s sound into s, and you can feel that it's vibrant. So that's how we teach, using an analogy from their native songs. Are songs a good way to improve pronunciation? I think they might be. I think they might be a good way. I'm not entirely sure. I don't read that much research about actually language acquisition. But if you enjoy it and you do it regularly, if you can practice consistently, yeah, it's gonna be a good way. Consistent practice in anything will help you get better. When I identify with someone, my accent becomes more similar. When I disagree, the opposite happens. Do you include the identity emotion of in work? No, I don't. But this sort of, I think it's called linguistic accommodation, is a thing that happens. I learned about it in social linguistics as well. I don't really do this because, I don't teach this because I don't think it's that relevant. It'll naturally happen. It might be, sometimes it happens with accents, like if you're good friends with if you're an American and you're good friends with British people, you'll start to speak like them, or if you hate them, you'll speak like them. Alright, what do people actually mean when they say they have an Italian voice or a French voice? Are they referring to where to go? I think I can't see the question anymore, but... Oh, fair enough. Oh, today? Okay. Yeah, so it might be. I think I have noticed that different languages are spoken at a generally different pitch. I read somewhere that Polish is actually spoken at a higher pitch often, and then they kind of talk like this. They kind of go up at the end and then falls a lot. And I guess you get that sort of intonation kind of mixed with the general average frequency or pitch level for different languages, but I'm not really sure, but I think it is about that, as well as, I guess, the accent. Alright. Are there accents that you consider disgusting? And are there accents that you consider sexy? I think everyone kind of has some accents they prefer, some accents that they don't like as much. Some accents are kind of funny, like some sounds like implosives to me are quite funny. So when there are languages that have sounds like but, and so when they say but, like by, it almost sounds quite funny to me. But I don't think anything is quite disgusting. It's always very interesting. I love learning about these things. So, what language in the world do you think is most difficult? I mean, it depends on your perspective. Like, as an English speaker, some languages are quite difficult, like any sort of Chinese language or Asian language. But I grew up in Hong Kong, so I do speak Mandarin and Cantonese, so it's not that difficult to me. Personally, I find Croatian quite difficult because, well, they have long and short vowels, but it's not written out. And then they have pitch accent, but it's not written down. And the books the books don't actually teach you pitch accent because they say there is pitch accent in this language, but it doesn't really matter, so we're not going to teach you. And like all the textbooks say that, and I can never actually get it. But it actually doesn't matter that much for comprehension. I just like to know that, like, improve my pronunciation because I love sounds and phonetics and phonology. Yeah, that for me it's difficult to improve and get the pronunciation to a good level. How do you find the most difficult Chinese dialect? I've heard Mandarinese is quite difficult. There is a saying in China, apparently, that fear not heaven and fear not earth. Just fear Wenzhou people speaking the Wenzhou dialect. But I've never tried to learn it, but I've heard it's really difficult. And I think they used, I'm not sure though, I think they might have used it as like a secret code or something in the
yes.
World Wars. Oh yeah?
There's a legend that I can prove, but this is what I read too. It's like the wind talkers, the Navajos. The Wenzhou people were transmitting messages. It is similar to the wind talker Navajo. The Kuomintang army during World War II used the Wenzhou people to pass messages, to bypass the intelligence of the Japanese to decipher. So that's because it's a hard time.
Okay, yeah, so, yeah, I guess I heard it correctly, but yeah, I guess Mandarinese is one of the hardest ones. It's also, I believe, a Min dialect, or maybe a mix between Min and Wu, and Min is one of the older forms. It retains a lot of old Chinese forms, but so it's probably quite difficult. Alright, thanks for an interesting talk. Yeah, thanks for having me here. Is it possible to acquire the ability to make really alien sounds, especially alien sounds? Okay. I feel like I have a kind of paralysis. Yeah, this one's quite difficult. I think I have a theoretical knowledge of how to. I think I have a theoretical knowledge of how to teach it, but I'm really glad that English doesn't have it because I haven't been able to teach my friend how to say "ra," but I've been able to do it, so I'm happy I can do it. But I think there are a lot of videos out there because a lot of people have the same problem, so you can check that out. But other people do learn it, and so it is definitely possible. I just think it's quite difficult. 我找到我们荷兰语方面wait, you mean the Dutch dialects? I don't speak Dutch, so I don't know the answer to this. How do I find them? Can you translate the question? Sorry, what?
Can I translate the question?
Oh yeah, how do you? That's what it says. How do you find or how do you locate the Holland? Yeah, that's Holland, right? Yeah, it's like or the Dutch dialect. I don't know Dutch dialects. I don't know Dutch, the standardized either. So I'm not sure how to answer this. Yeah. I think that's it.
Thank you, Adrian.